Oh, g'day, mate. 40 here. I mean, wouldn't it be great if doing the right thing just paid for itself? I mean, wouldn't it be great if the most righteous guys got the most righteous girls and the most righteous girls got the most righteous guys? But if you went to high school and you found out that the cheerleaders were indulging in premarital sex, all right, it wasn't with the great science scholars, wasn't with the best students in the humanities, it was with the frequently oafish and jerky football players. And so too in the real world, all right, the most curvy, most attractive women, all right, they frequently pair up with the guys who are the most dubious. So too the the small-breasted solid woman who makes a great wife and mother, right, she is frequently passed by the alpha guys, and she has to struggle, even though she's going to make a much better wife and mother than the more curvy and glamorous women who thrive briefly from say 18 to 25 and then hit the wall, don't turn out to be great mothers, turn out to be briefly great lovers, but in the long run don't turn out to be great wives and mothers. So doing the right thing doesn't always pay for itself. I like what my father said. So the problem isn't that the world isn't fair. The problem is that the world isn't perfectly fair. Now, there are two fundamentally different ways of viewing the world. One is to focus on your rights, right? So, right to free speech, right to free exercise of my religion, right to sue, right to gather together to address grievances against the government. Focus on your rights. Maybe your neighbors are infringing your rights. Maybe your boss is infringing your rights. Maybe some rando on the street is infringing your rights, right? That's one approach to life. And then another approach to life is to instead focus on your responsibilities as members of a tribe or as members of a nation or of a group. So I don't think the classical liberal perspective of seeing people primarily as individuals born with certain inalienable rights is a particularly useful way of viewing the world. I think it's much more useful to understand ourselves as not primarily individuals, but members of tribes, members of extended families, members of nations, and whatever rights that the tribe or the nation can afford is going to vary depending upon time and circumstance. And so it would be great if you could just go out there, do hard-hitting investigative journalism, and the world just rewards you for it. But if you go out there and do some tough things, if you want to go out there and be a hero, frequently the world will push back in not very nice ways. So this is the New York Times. A reporter investigated sexual misconduct. Then the attacks began. After publishing an expose, journalists in New Hampshire faced broken windows, vulgar graffiti, and a legal brawl with important First Amendment implications. So yeah, getting out there, doing the right thing may frequently ruin your life, right? Just because you're doing the right thing doesn't mean that you're going to be on easy street and people will widely recognize you as a hero. New York Times, Sarah.
My name is David Enrich, and I am the business investigations editor at the New York Times. Lauren Shulgin, a reporter at New Hampshire Public Radio, published an investigation last year into a guy named Eric Spofford, who was the owner of the state's largest network of rehab centers. Ms. Shulgin spoke to dozens of former employees and patients of those rehab centers who said that Mr. Spofford had engaged in sexual misconduct.
I've learned of a pattern of alleged sexual misconduct by Eric Spofford, including harassment and credible allegations of sexual assault from women who worked for him. Spofford declined to be interviewed for this story. He called the allegations false and unsubstantiated and threatened legal action.
After her piece was published last year, the homes of Ms. Shulgin, her editor, and her parents were all vandalized.
Right, so if your understanding of the world is that we are primarily individuals with inalienable rights, such as to free speech, you're going to be horrified and mystified and bedeviled and frantic and outraged by this story. But if instead you understand that we are not primarily individuals, but we're born members of tribes, and whatever rights the tribe can afford is going to vary depending upon circumstance, you're going to be, much better positioned to deal with a story like this. So I may not have driven all night to get here to talk to you, but Gotta be honest, I had to escape. The city was sticky and cruel. Maybe I should have called you first, but I was dying to get to you. I was dreaming while I walked. Yeah, I walked all Arvo, right? I walked for 35 minutes this Arvo. I was dreaming while I walked, like the long straight road ahead. I could taste your sweet kisses, your arms open wide. This fever for you was just burning me up inside. Like I walked all Arvo to get to you. Is that all right? I walked all Arvo. I crept into your room. I woke you from your sleep to make love to you. Is that all right? I walked all Arvo. What in this world keeps us from falling apart? No matter where I go, I hear the beating of our one heart. I think about you when the night is cold and dark. Yeah. No one can move me the way that you do. Nothing erases this feeling between me and you. Yeah, I walked all Arvo to get to you.
Police in Melrose are looking to identify this man who threw a brick through the window of a New Hampshire radio reporter's home last Saturday. The vandal also spray painted the words, "Just the beginning," on the home.
And at the same time, she and her employer were sued for libel and what has become a protracted legal brawl that has really important implications for the First Amendment. The story that I'm going to read today is about what happens when journalists go after rich and powerful people and the fights that sometimes causes.
My personal attorney, general counsel to Spofford Enterprises, new to the team, street fighting attorney, wild, more on that later. But YouTube videos out, crazy weekend.
Spofford describes himself as a recovering drug addict. He often regales audiences with stories about his life of drugs and crime back years earlier.
So there's nothing that can't be abused, from Orthodox Judaism to Orthodox Christianity to atheism to secular humanism to science. Absolutely everything, including 12-step recovery, can be abused, right? The 13th step is frequently the slipperiest.
I started using drugs and alcohol. I also started selling drugs at 10. I still have the state of New Hampshire's record as the youngest individual charged with drug sales.
He got sober. He started this network of rehabilitation centers.
Tell us about your house, Granite House.
The Granite House is located in two locations, in Derry and Manchester, New Hampshire. I founded it. Me and my father founded it 14 months ago. We started the first location.
And has become a really big fish in New Hampshire. He was invited to testify before the U.S. Congress about the opioid crisis.
Good morning. It's an honor and privilege to be here. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of 2 substance abuse treatment programs in New Hampshire.
And he ultimately sold his company for what he says was $115 million. And along the way has developed a very kind of strong personal brand with more than 1 million social media followers.
If there was a rock bottom, I started below it. And so no matter what, as long as you're breathing this hope, you can build an unbelievable life that includes an amazing network, amazing human beings, success, money, purpose.
And he uses that to kind of coach people on recovery and on building a business and entrepreneurship, and also to browbeat his critics.
If you put your goddamn shoes on in the morning and wall into my business and then gossip, you are spreading toxic negativity and attacking what I am working so feverishly to build, what other people are working so hard to build, and what I have put significant portion of my personal net worth on the line and my neck on the line to build. If you gossip in my business, I feel like you have attacked me in the company, and I want you out immediately.
I started focusing on this several months ago because
So I've been breaking stories online for 26 years. I've been blogging and vlogging. And here's what happens. Whenever you hurt someone, even when you're doing the right thing, you're exposing a predator, sexual predator, financial predator, all right, a predator of the soul, all right? People always hurt you back, all right? So there are usually a very few cheap roads to heroism, right? You want to be the hero, right? There's usually going to be some pretty nasty pushback. If you just want fairly innocuous, inoffensive ways of helping people, there are tons of those opportunities. It's just you're not going to get acclaimed as a hero, right? You can help people all day long, but you won't get praised for it if you take the inoffensive route.
Because I, like many other journalists at the New York Times and elsewhere, have become really accustomed to receiving legal threats and demands virtually every time we publish an investigative piece of journalism. At the Times, we are privileged to have the resources and the great legal.
Oh, and so here's a great question for many news stories like this. And what's the alternative? All right. What's the alternative to not getting legal threats? The alternative, if you don't have a system where people can make legal threats against you, is that they will hire goons to break your legs. So compared to the alternatives, getting legal threats is a much healthier, saner way of living, right? The United States is a flawed country, right? But where do you think life is just so much better? U.S. legal system has very deep flaws, but which other legal systems do you think are just so far in advance of what the United States has? So if you didn't create room for people to sue you when they're unhappy with you, they'd be hiring goons to break your legs.
Advice that allows us to deal with these things as they come up. But my hunch was that smaller news organizations would really have a tougher time dealing with these types of legal and sometimes physical threats. So I set out to see what these threats looked like on a local basis. And as I asked around, a bunch of people mentioned to me the case up in New Hampshire. And I started digging, and it struck me as a really powerful and vivid example of the threats that local journalists often find themselves facing. So here's my article. A reporter investigated sexual misconduct. Then the attacks began. One drizzly Saturday in May last year, a slender man in a blue raincoat approached a house in the Boston suburb of Melrose. It was just before 6 a.m., and no one was around. The man took out a can of red spray paint and scrawled, "Just the beginning," on the side of the White House. Then he hurled a brick through a large window and sprinted away. The house belonged to Lauren Chulgin.
Wouldn't it be great if you could just be a hero on the cheap? Wouldn't it be great if you could go out there championing the causes of, those who've been taken advantage of, and there wouldn't be any pushback, right? So if you live in the liberal delusion that we are primarily individuals with certain inalienable rights, then this news story is going to come, as a great disappointment.
Journalist at New Hampshire Public Radio. Hours earlier, her parents' home in New Hampshire had been vandalized too, for the second time in a month.
So come on, aren't we all individuals? Like when people want to get back at you, where would they go after your parents, right? People look for your weak spots. If you got a family, they're going to go after your family. If you've got a guru, they're going to go after your guru, right? Whenever I did anything edgy and people knew that Dennis Prager was my hero, Dennis Prager was my guru, they would go to Dennis Prager with their complaints. If I got close to a particular rabbi, they'd go to that particular rabbi. If I got close to a particular community, they'd go to that community, right? People look for your weak spots, and people are really good at doing that. And so that's the price for having close attachments. That's the price for having community and love in your life. It just makes you so much more vulnerable, and you want to get out there and be a hero, right? There's going to be a very nasty price to pay. Heroism usually isn't cheap.
Weeks earlier, her editor's home had also been attacked. The vandals' 3-word message in red would prove accurate. What started as a string of vandalism incidents has mushroomed over the past year into a bare-knuckle legal brawl with important implications for the First Amendment.
Right, so if you understood that we are primarily not individuals, but members of tribes, this wouldn't be shocking, all right? That people, when they want revenge, they'd go after your family and tribal connections.
Attacks on journalists in the United States have become common.
As opposed to where are things so much more idyllic, right? Journalists have enormous power to hurt people. Why would there not be attacks on journalists? Right? Journalists as a profession have enormous power to wreak havoc, to devastate and destroy lives. Why would there be no response? Why would you envision a world where journalists have one-way power to destroy others, but they can rest easy at home that there's going to be no pushback, right? That's absurd, right? You give any individual the power to ruin lives, and you're going to set up such individuals and such professions for other people to hate them and wreak revenge, right? As soon as you start disrupting people's lives and damaging people's lives and wreaking havoc, then people are going to get their revenge. It's impossible for reality to be any different. Like, you can't defeat reality. Like, reality is. Right? If it comes to your fantasies and your beliefs and your moral structure, right? And it differs from reality, reality is going to win. And what's happening in this story is just basic bitch reality. This is how the world works. And I'm coming back here 1,000 times if I have to.
Last year, the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker identified 41 journalists who were physically assaulted. In one extreme case, a Nevada politician was charged with murdering a reporter investigating him.
The good, aren't always rewarded. Is this my rant? For a professional broadcaster, Hannity sucks at speaking. So, have you looked at Roger Ailes' book on communication? The way that he would test whether or not someone would be a good professional broadcaster is he'd watch them with the sound off, bro. So, to get the full Sean Hannity effect, you need to watch with the sound off.
It is, so pay attention in Pennsylvania. Herschel Walker continues to outpoll radical Raphael Warnock in Georgia. That race also remains close. And perhaps the biggest political news comes out of the deep, deep blue state of New York, where Republican Lee Zeldin is now officially taken the lead in a brand new poll by Trafalgar. That's Robert Cahaley's group. Now, Lee Zeldin will be here as he's campaigning with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. That's straight ahead.
Pointless.
Here.
This is actually a pretty...
In a dead heat tie. Anything can happen. Don't think for a second this is a slam dunk. In other words, every voter needs to do their part. Take nothing for granted and don't forget what is at stake.
Okay, so you are the message. This is actually a pretty good book by the late Roger Ailes, the man who developed Fox News. So he says, look in a mirror and study your own face. Begin to talk about a political issue and see which part of your face moves and which doesn't. Using the same subject matter, repeat the conversation. However, imagine that you're now speaking to a child. See if your face softens, if your eyes become more expressive, if there is a tendency to care more that the listener understands what you are saying. Most people tend to use more facial expressions when talking to children. So I need to start talking to you like your little children. Let the little children come unto me. Okay, here are the 10 most common problems in communication. All right, this is a good book here by Roger Ailes. Right? Lack of initial rapport with listeners. Stiffness or woodness in the use of the body. Presentation of material that is intellectually oriented. Right? And the speaker forgets to involve the audience emotionally. Speaker seems uncomfortable because of fear of failure. Poor use of eye contact and facial expression. Lack of humor. Speech direction and intent unclear due to improper preparation. Inability to use silence for impact, a lack of energy causing inappropriate pitch pattern, speech rate, and volume, and use of boring language and lack of interesting material. So you're asking, 40, what does it mean? You are the message. 40, Richard Spencer's on with Ethan Ralph right now. 40 is a much better speaker than Roger Hannity. Roger Ailes effed up when he passed on 40. Talk dirty to me, 40. Yeah. Oh, Glenn Bentley says, I read that book. Some of it was good. Yeah, some of it is good. So I want to see Richard Hanania in a prime time spot at Foxborough. Good evening and welcome to 40 tonight. Okay, you're the message. What does that mean? It means that when you communicate, it's not just the words you choose to send to the other person that make up the message. You're also sending signals about what kind of person you are by your eyes, your facial expression, your body movement, your vocal pitch, your tone, your volume, your intensity, your commitment to your message, your sense of humor, and many other factors. The receiving person is bombarded with symbols and signals from you. Yeah, we're always transmitting. If you're an addict, you're transmitting the disease. If you got intoxicated, you're transmitting God. We're always transmitting, like a 50,000-watt KFI radio station. So everything you do in relation to other people causes them to make judgments about what you stand for and what your message is. You are the message. Comes down to the fact that unless you identify yourself as a walking, talking message, understand you're constantly transmitting, you miss that critical point. The words themselves are meaningless unless the rest of you is in synchronization. So if you're uncomfortable with who you are, it will make others uncomfortable too. So I was talking to a fellow sex addict the other day, and I was saying that the most important part of recovery is becoming comfortable with yourself. So if you did shameful things in the past, you need to be able to talk to someone about them and to relay honestly what you did without getting all tensed up, without your voice, croaking in shame, without you getting a shame attack, your face blushing red. You need to be able to talk about everything you've done so that you are at ease with yourself. Right? That's the best way to minimize the chances of having your life disrupted by addiction. So generally speaking, people with secure attachment patterns, meaning people who move towards people who treat them well and who are good for them, and people who naturally move away from people who treat them badly, and people who have a positive image of themselves, right? Secure attachment. These people are the least likely to be stuck with addictions. On the other hand, people like me and the way I was raised with insecure attachment patterns where I just obsess over relationships that are important to me, or avoidant attachment patterns where you feel like just any kind of attachment is just way too scary. You just prefer to be on your own. Well, that creates a vast hole that addictions kind of rush to fill in. So over the past few years, I've learned to become increasingly comfortable with myself by, attending the appropriate 12-step meetings. 5 to 10, 15 minutes of daily meditation has helped. Getting in a routine. I'm someone who needs routine. Chaos is not good for me. So I have a disciplined routine. And that helps me achieve a comfort level. Having money in the bank, regular money coming in, greatly helps comfort level. Having good relations with my family, friends, wider community. Okay, so let's just play a little classic here, and then we'll get back to the show.
We're coming back here like a fucking 100 times. I am so mad. I am so fucking mad at these people. They don't do this to fucking me. We're gonna fucking ritualistically humiliate them. I am coming back here every fucking weekend we have to. Like, this is never over. I win, they fucking lose. That's how the world fucking works. Little fucking kites. They get ruled by people like me. Little fucking octoroons. My ancestors fucking enslaved those pieces of fucking shit. I rule the fucking world. Those pieces of shit get ruled by people like me. They look up and see a face like mine looking down at them. That's how the fucking world works. We are gonna destroy this fucking town.
Okay. There's a classic Richard Spencer rant from Charlottesville set to music. But what the hell is the topic mean? News, goodness, great sex don't pay for themselves. Well, let's just look at news. Good article in latest issue of Mother Jones magazine, left-wing magazine. News never pays. Stop pretending the marketplace will save journalism. Right? There's a Groundhog Day vibe in the news about media every day. Seems that Puxahony Phil pokes his head above ground to find more. Newsroom shutting down and laying journalists off. Like, I love journalism. In 8th grade, I decided I wanted to be a journalist when I grew up, but it's really hard to make a living as a journo. BuzzFeed News, the digital outlet that only a few years ago was winning all the prizes, hiring all the talent, throwing all the parties, it shut down. Its founder confessed he'd overinvested in the newsroom. Vice, right? I remember a publicist was setting me up with Vice back in 1998. Right, it's headed for bankruptcy. The Daily Beast is on the auction block. Washington Post, NPR, CNN have announced layoffs. Corporate media owners keep strangling local news. Right, the nation's top news organizations are defaulting. Right, and what the hell's going on? Right, the idea that news is an industry and that the marketplace will take care of ensuring the free and fearless press that a democracy needs is just not true. So the news for profit fallacy means that a lot of people expect that good journalism will be paid for by advertising, paywalls, and some other commercial wizardry. Right, 3 of the biggest names in the world of digital news last month: BuzzFeed founder Jonah Peretti, former BuzzFeed news editor Ben Smith, Gawker founder Nick Denton, got together the first time on the Recode podcast to dissect exactly how hundreds of millions of dollars invested in the quest for scale and digital publishing went up in smoke. Right, nonprofit newsrooms, right? They're working out all right. Let's go to Elliott Blatt. What's going on, bro?
Blessings, bro. How you doing?
Blessings to you.
Little streaming vacation for Luke.
Yeah.
But mercifully, it's come to an end.
Blessings.
We can all relax.
What's going on, man?
Well, Luke, as we've discussed, I'm a poet.
That you are.
And I'd like to recite another poem if I could.
Please.
Okay. Luke, when I think about you, I think about love. Luke, don't live without you and your love. If I had those golden dreams of my yesterday, I'd wrap you up in heaven till I'm dying. On the way, feel like making love.
Mm.
What do you think, bro?
That is amazing. I am so moved right now. I'm speechless.
Thanks, bro.
You've got a gift, man.
I know, unrecognized, but express itself somewhere, bro. And you're the lucky recipient.
I mean, it's a shame that you're stuck with humdrum tasks. I mean, in a true society, in a good society, you would have the financial wherewithal to just devote yourself to poetry all day long, and you could just
That's right.
making love out of nothing at all.
That's right. It's my dream, bro. That's why I slog every day, because that's the little the rainbow on the horizon. It's a carrot at the end of this toil. I'm striving for. So anyway,
it's been a while, bro. Well, it's like 10 days, man. Have you
10 days,
lost
right?
it? Have
Not
you
my
lost
fault,
it
bro.
at the?
I'm not the one that stopped streaming, bro.
Have you lost it at the grocery store recently?
No. I had an interesting experience though. I could relate a little bit. So, I've been nagged with these car issues, minor car issues, but issues nonetheless. And if you have a car issue, you get this little indicator on your dashboard. And then we've talked about this in the past, but they've been coming fast and furious. Brakes problems, left turn signal, right turn signal, oil level, all these indicator lights that come on, and then the car barks at you. And it's just like this assault, you're always assaulted by your own vehicle, like telling you about its needs, and some of these repairs can be quite expensive, even though they're easy to do. And so I just hate that. I hate going to an auto repair shop and just getting completely raped, Rape isn't right, bro. And so I've had these issues stacking up, and some of them were almost within my grasp, but not quite within my grasp. And so I get this call more or less out of the blue. I don't know if we discussed this or not, but a person I've been, a former neighbor of mine that's moved away and it's been away for a number of years, but then reached out to me sort of, and then, so we sort of reconnected after some multi-year gap and invited me out and to see their place. I went to their place and her husband turns out to be like this mechanic whiz. And so we, this past Saturday, I went out to their place and we just sort of knocked out. We did a bunch of car repair, on our back, car jacked up, tools going hither and yon. And we just fixed all of these problems together, bro. It was like bros being bros. It was so nice and it was so productive. And I just squashed all of these problems, all these mechanical problems I solved with an hour and a half with a sort of a friend,
Oh, wow, that must have brought back a lot of wonderful memories with your father.
Yeah, it did.
Remember how you guys would just while away a Sunday afternoon working on cars?
Wrenches and socket sets and wire cutters and all that kind of stuff, going clinky clink clack. It was so much fun, bro. And I
Good
just
old
felt
dad.
so good, man. I felt so good doing that,
Yeah.
taking control of my destiny, rather than just sort of aimlessly staggering into some sort of repair shop and saying, just charge me whatever you can. I don't know anything, I took the power of knowledge. I took the power of empowerment. And I solved some problems. So it was like really one of the most satisfying things I've done in a long time, bro.
But here's my real question for you. You're a man in his 50s. Why haven't you developed a sustained, mutually loving, mutually committed relationship with an honest car repairman? Instead, you've just been going all around town, trying out this floozy car mechanic and that floozy car mechanic. Why haven't you established a mutually loving, respectful, and committed relationship with one car mechanic and stick with that bloke, for a long time?
Well, I think Elvis said it best, Luke. Elvis said,
"You ain't nothing but a hound dog."
No, why buy a cow when you can get milk through the fence?
Bro,
Sage words, my dude.
I don't get it here. Like, I have found there are honest car mechanics near me. You get word of mouth. Like, this guy's honest, and so I would just take my vehicle to the honest bloke, and then write good reviews about him. And I mean, an honest car mechanic is such a valuable thing, but it's got to be mutual, man. You got to support the honest mechanics.
Yeah, but bro, what if your car mechanic is 300 pounds and is covered in tattoos? Do you really want to bring your car to that mechanic?
Sure, if he's honest. I wouldn't care if you were transgender.
Really, bro?
Yeah, if he was honest.
I don't believe you, bro.
Well, there aren't a lot of transgender car mechanics, but no, I support. There are honest car mechanics near me, and I support them. I wouldn't take some cheap, attractive floozy deal advertised for an oil change for $29.95. I would just take my car every 3 or 6 months to my trusted mechanic and say, do whatever. Have your way with my vehicle.
Well,
and I never walked in on him raping my tailpipe. That never happened.
What if your mechanic has Budweiser tattooed across his breastplate?
I don't care, as long as he's honest, bro. Love is
Really,
love,
bro?
and honesty is honesty.
Love is love, bro. That's why I read that poem. I was hoping to set the tone for the evening.
But we have to get into these mutual relationships with the good guys. Let them know that we love them and respect them and care for them and financially support them, so that goodness and righteousness will flow like a mighty river.
Okay, so bro, all right, so this leads me to my second part 2 of my story while I was up there at this residence. And it was sort of a kind of rolling, semi-informal party. And so various people would roll in and out. We were picking cherries. They have a cherry tree, right? And so the sort of quote unquote purpose of the party was to pick the cherries from the cherry tree. Because of all the rain, cherries have been completely, very productive this year. So we're picking cherries and people are kind of rolling in, rolling out. They got their baskets. We're going to pick some cherries. But everybody rolling in and out was just horrifically obese. Horrifically, Luke. And it was such a buzzkill. What the fuck? This is what we excuse me, I'm choking. It was so depressing, Luke. It was so depressing. Am I just vain? Am I just sort of superficial? Or is there something I have to outgrow? But it was like the gigabooty is de rigueur. We can't expect anything else. Am I really the one to feel, Am I supposed to feel ashamed of not being attracted to this monstrosity that I'm looking at?
No, but I think we have to keep things in perspective. Like when it comes to a car mechanic or a neighbor or, interacting with people, berry picking, what's most important is that they're, fundamentally honest. I mean, that's 10 times as important as whether they're fat or have tattoos. So, I mean, we want the best possible relations that we can have with everyone we interact with, including the fatties.
Yeah, I know. And I did my best, and I was perfectly cordial and respectful and courteous and thoughtful and charming and everything else.
Beautiful.
I couldn't wait to get the fuck out of there, Luke. I couldn't wait.
Did they remind you of your own, obesity of the soul inside?
It did. It just threw me into this introspection of horror. Like, am I really this vain? Am I really this sort of superficial? Am I really this sort of appearance driven? And the sad fact is that I am, bro.
But do you get the same feelings of revulsion when you're around an under-owner? Like healthy people, when they encounter debtors and under-owners and sex addicts and alcoholics and drug addicts, they similarly get the same sort of revulsion that you feel towards the fatties. So do you feel that same intensity of revulsion towards addicts and under-owners?
No. Blatt, no. Sorry. I don't. Under-earning, I think, is a sort of superficial, it's a superficial imbalance that can be rectified rather easily. But
for some people it is a superficial imbalance, but for the true under-owner, it's something that's life-threatening, not just for him, but for the people around him. So, for example, you get in a car with an under-owner, and he hasn't, had the brakes checked, the tires are bald. You're risking your life. Someone who's filled with self-loathing, right? They're much more likely to make self-destructive and socially destructive decisions. So, for a lot of people, owning and under-owning is a matter of life and death.
I disagree, because under-earning could be a symptom of someone has some artistic passion, right? And they're not really interested in making money, and they hate making money, and they're just completely repelled by the idea of making money. So in fact, they don't make money, and so they earn less than they need to survive. And yes, it's a problem, but it's sort of tempered by this sort of kind of artistic zeal that they have. I'm able to forgive under-earning much more than I am, obesity.
Fat people. So you would 5 times rather be around under-owners than fat people?
Yeah, probably 10 times.
Wow. And I'd 10 times rather be around non-under-owners than under-owners, even if they're obese.
I know.
What
yours
is considered...
yours is probably the more healthy thing, but I'm just trying to be frank and honest with you, bro.
Yeah, no,
I'm
I
telling
appreciate
you the truth.
Yep.
It's like I understand the wisdom and the virtue in the position that you're presenting, but at the same time, it's like, all right, let me give you an example. So, years ago, I used to go to a chess club and I played chess. And there were good chess players that had no charisma. And then there were bad chess players that had lots of charisma, right? And I'd always prefer to play the high charisma, bad skill players rather than the low charisma, good skill players. Charisma is sort of is the fire that makes social interaction enjoyable. Yeah, and if you lack that fire, I couldn't care less, right? And high charisma also, to me, not scientific, bro, but high charisma also sort of correlates with high humor, And this is what I'm drawn to. This is the flame that this moth being Elliott is drawn to.
Yeah, because there's something in you that's broken, and it feels there's a part of your soul that gets filled up by charisma. So that's why you're looking for podcasts and videos that fill you up, even if, you know, what they're ultimately selling is cheap grace. But if it sounds good and feels good, it's you know, highly appealing for you, like junk food for the soul.
Yeah. Basically, I'm a intellectual junk food addict, and I need help, bro.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what type of people, you know, are drawn to charisma, because, you know, charisma is something that fills people up with energy. It fills, you know, broken parts inside people. It makes them feel more alive, more excited. It you know, takes them out of the humdrum reality and transports them to a higher plane.
Yes, exactly right, Luke. It's like, I don't know. It's sort of like it's like it's this zest for life that people with high charisma have, that makes them attractive. Like, you can't live without zest. Otherwise, what are you doing? You're just eating breakfast and going to sleep, eating breakfast, going to sleep. Somebody with charisma makes it feel like there's some transcendence in the offing.
And what if they offer you a parasocial relationship? So you feel like you're really getting to know this person and that they are, you know, a virtual friend.
That'd be very seductive, my dude. Very seductive indeed.
And you see that they've got some things that you don't have.
Yeah, true. That would intensify the allure.
Yeah, that parasocial relationship. Now, you've had that at times. So what have been the most intense parasocial relationships that you've had?
Intense parasocial relationships. I don't know, Luke. I mean, parasocial is a new word to me, so I'm trying to wrap some meaning around that. So.
Yeah, I've always got a new word. I've always got a new intellectual enthusiasm, like every few weeks. Like, I'm obsessed with some new fancy sounding word.
If you're talking about internet relationships, right? To mean parasocial relationships, I think I know what you mean. But if you're talking about something else, I'm not sure what you mean. But yeah, there's certain internet figures whom, you know, I gravitate towards. I'd want the respect of. I'm interested in, but relationship seems to be a word to me that crosses a certain boundary. Like, it sort of connotes a certain intimacy, and, you know, I recognize which side of the fence of intimacy I'm on.
And where does fisting play in all this?
It's not primary, but it's a subordinate consideration.
So, I mean, what kind of role does fisting play in a loving, committed relationship?
You got me, bro. You got me, bro. It's deep. Wasn't ready for that one, dude. I'm very sure about anything else. Well, bro, all I can say is that love is love, bro. And, like, if love
expresses itself through fisting, yeah.
Then love is love. Who am I to judge, bro? I'm just a humble dude, bro. Trying to get through the day. It's not me to judge.
And has that been a significant way that you have expressed love?
Significant? No. Secondary? Possibly.
Yeah, it's like the cherry on top.
Exactly. It's like Sukkot. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Such an obvious analogy.
Totally obvious. All right.
Blessings.
All right. Well, now that we've hit the bottom, bro, I think I'm out of gas.
Okay, bro. Thanks for stopping by, man. Thanks for blessing us. Shalom. Parafisting.
Shalom.
I'm going to move on with parafisting relationships. So, okay, talk about parafisting. Here's what I mean by parasocial relationships.
I am right now in Serbia, Belgrade, Serbia, with listeners. I have taken listeners on cruises for approximately 30 years. The only time I've ever missed was when I had no choice, when lockdowns, those irrational acts of governmental authority, closed down the cruise lines. So obviously it was impossible. Other than that, I've been on cruises with listeners. It's so popular, the listener cruises, Julie, that the entire boat on the Danube cruise from Budapest to Bulgaria, actually to Bulgaria, then Romania, is just my listeners. The entire boat is Dennis Prager listeners. So everybody knows wherever they sit, they are with a kindred spirit. I can't tell you how much it means to me to see these people make these wonderful friends from all over America on these cruises with me. As you know, I love bringing people together, not just getting people married, but just getting people friends. So the whole thing is a high, to be honest. But I wanted to emphasize your point. You and I are so committed to not missing a single Dennis and Julie podcast that here I am, late at night in Yugoslavia. Well, there's no longer Yugoslavia, in Serbia, and talking to you, and it's a delight. Julie, so I know you have a ton on your mind, as you always do, but I want, while it's in context, to talk to you about the incredible assets, bonuses, advantages of travel. That it is literally, to use a word that's overused, life-changing, to go around the world as often as one can. Do you sense that? Because obviously you're so young, you haven't been able to get to that many places yet. But is that something that resonates with you?
You have no idea. I mean, even when I was in Washington State about a month ago speaking, I'd never been to Washington State. And when I landed there, the second I got off the plane, it was like, eyes up, pay attention. I wanted to see how the airport was different, how people there maybe dressed differently. When I was driving, I was asking, what's that? I love being in a new place. It's such a new opportunity. I'm going to quote you, actually. I have to give you credit. You've taught me that, among many other things. You always give credit to people who you quote. Dennis and I were on the phone the other day, and he said, traveling allows you to see the human condition in different contexts and cultures. I thought that was so well said. And so to answer your question, of course, I try to do it even when I drive to a new part of Los Angeles, let alone a foreign country.
Well, look, I'm not surprised because, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I think God gave both of us very similar souls. So you will get a big kick out of this. I grew up in New York City, which has a very extensive subway system. When I was in sixth grade, I went from Brooklyn to Manhattan every day and back on my own using the New York City subway system. So I got on very near Coney Island in a place called the Kings Highway. That was my stop. And then I would go 40 minutes to Manhattan. I wanted to know every stop on the New York City subway system. I actually, on occasion, would just go to the subway and take it to stops I had never seen. And it was so exciting for me. I mean, we're talking about the New York City subway. We're not talking about Serbia. So when you say that you looked at the Washington airport, the Seattle airport, and you go, wow, it's different. That's exactly right.
I've come to think about this recently. You said this on a recent episode of Dennis and Julie. I believe you're quoting Socrates, who said the unexamined life is not worth living. I think there are two paths in life, the engaged life and the not engaged life. If you take the former route and you look up and pay attention, it is endlessly interesting. There's so much that you can learn. I mean, yes, you're epitomizing it by traveling to Serbia, but even if, as I said, just going to a different part of Los Angeles or paying attention to the different stops on the subway, there's a lot to be observed and gleaned from everyday experience.
Yes. So the question that haunts me, I don't have a full answer.
Anyway, this is a photo of Savannah reading your book as she's in labor. Oh my God, I get so many. I'll tell you one other email, and then I have some thoughts on what you were saying before. But this one might be one of the most touching I've ever received. There was a listener who wrote to us about a month ago, and he said, "Dear Dennis and Julie, I want to write this to you because I can't talk about this very much in my home because I don't want to further upset my children. I don't talk about this a lot in my workplace because I don't want people in my workplace to see me differently. But I just wanted to tell you, because I view you both as friends in my life, that my wife just died of breast cancer, and I'm really sad. It's difficult for me to..."
Imagine the sadness that you can't talk about your wife dying of breast cancer with anyone in your life, so you tell it to a YouTube personality. I mean, the sadness and the emptiness in this man's life is heartbreaking. Right? If you can't talk about your wife dying with anyone in your life, then you probably need to rethink how you go about your life, and you probably need to bring some different people into your life. I mean, I was empty and bereft when, I embraced Dennis Prager as my Lord and Savior and guru. All right? I spent my last dollar sending Dennis Prager tapes around, because I was so empty, and the charisma of Dennis Prager, and his enlisting me in the fight for good values, right, that filled up superficially the emptiness in my soul. But it's not a healthy way to try to fill up your soul.
Go about my life, and I just felt the need to tell you. That was so touching, because it really does show that they thought that this man thought of us as friends. And that's what we want to impart to viewers.
No, it's not what you want to impart to viewers, because you're encouraging them in delusion. And encouraging people in delusion is not usually a good thing. Encouraging people in lies and delusion is not usually the moral thing to do. Right? Encouraging people in lies and delusion is not something to aim for. It's not something you should be selling. Right? You don't know me because I do a show on YouTube. You only know a little bit of me, which is a performance. This is a performance. This isn't just like regular Luke.
I've made friends off of this show. I have some close friends that I've made through this program. We don't just want to be talk shows. We truly want to be in people's lives.
Well, my description of myself since I began was, I'm not a talk show host. I'm a human with a talk show.
That's great. That's really great. It's true.
I thought you.
It's a delusion. All right. Dennis also talks about how he has to use 10 times as much energy as he would in normal conversation to do a talk show. So it is a performance that gives the simulacra of authenticity.
Do it like that particular line. The yearning to bond with people who are kindred spirits is what's behind all of this. And you have it, and I have it in massively. I mean, I have a boat.
Yes, it's a good thing to bond with people who are kindred spirits, particularly if you're kindred spirits in a kind of dissident way, and it's not easy to find kindred spirits in your real life. Then if it's supplementing your real life family, your real life relationships, your real life community, then what we're doing now is perfectly healthy. If it's serving as a substitute for real life interaction, then it's unhealthy.
Literally a boatload of kindred spirits. And so I don't suffer from what is a very big malaise in America of people who have traditional values and can't find friends because of that fact, or have friends.
If you can't find friends because you have traditional values, you are delusional, right? That's not where you don't have friends, right? There's something else going on, right? Our problems are never our problems. Our problems are symptoms of much deeper things that we don't want to address. And so instead we, focus on them as our problems. So I'm 57, I'm a bachelor, right? If I focused on, I'm a bachelor, I need to fix this problem of being a bachelor, that would be a flight from the reality that there is, a deep brokenness with me in normal human interactions, a certain inflexibility with me for normal human interactions, so that I devote so much of myself to artificially created, flight to paradise interactions where I can control things like my own show, right? My bachelorhood is a symptom of a much deeper brokenness in me. It's not the problem. And anyone who thinks that they don't have friends because they have traditional values, right? That's delusion.
That they can't open up to. So to a certain extent, we sort of play the role of being their friends, and it's not playing it in the sense of make believe. It is real. Obviously, I want people.
It's delusion. All right. You do a show, you advocate conservative values, but you're not friends with people who you never meet, who you have no personal interactions with. And the only time when I think that is healthy is for people who are in my situation, like in the late 1980s when I was bedridden by chronic fatigue syndrome, my life had completely fallen apart. And when, reality was just so incredibly painful, encouraging people then, for a short time in some kind of delusional parasocial relationship, may be better than nothing. Who knows? I may not be here today except for my delusional parasocial relationship with Dennis Prager. Just like for some people who, don't have the option of, a real life, sexual romantic relationship, for some people, possibly, porn is better than nothing, possibly. Right? Encouraging people to have a delusional, entirely one-way, parasocial relationship, an imaginary friendship with people you have no, personal interactions with is kind of like using pornography because you don't have, a woman in your life.
People to have people who are in their lives physically to have that bond, but a lot of people do not. There was a couple on this trip that told me that they came with me to Israel prior to the lockdowns. The last time we went, 2019, right before the lockdowns. I never say before COVID. And they were on the trip of listeners of mine to Israel. And by the way, I have another one coming up this fall, and people interested should just go to DennisPrager.com and click on the banner for information, Stand with Israel. And this boat is 150 listeners. The Israel trip is usually about 500. And they told me something I hear all the time. They said, I just want you to know, we were on bus number 10. And we got so close to the people on bus number 10 that we actually have bought a place in Florida where we all stay at just to be with each other. And they're from all over the country. I don't even know if more than two are from Florida.
Yeah, I mean, these are people who are united by really shoddy reasoning, by really corrupt epistemics, by a delusional worldview that, we're living in a society that's on the road to becoming like Nazi Germany and Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union.
Florida, they became literally the closest friends in their lives from being on bus number 10. I'm going to tell this when I come back and I promote the Israel trip, but it makes perfect sense. I love that I'm giving people an opportunity to meet terrific people. People may come for me. It's my old line about they come for Dennis but stay for Sue, which you know how true that is.
It is true.
But it is also true in my public life. They come for me, but they stay for the folks that they meet. Mm-hmm. So, and I love that. It doesn't take anything away.
So it depends on the stew that you're cooking. If you're cooking up a stew that, like Dennis Prager is doing, telling people that we're becoming like Nazi Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union, right? You're creating something that's destructive, and to the extent that people take you seriously, is going to damage lives, right? If you believe that your left-wing parent or relative is essentially indistinguishable from the commissars of Joseph Stalin, right? That's going to damage your relationship with those people. It's going to separate you from people that you work with, people that you go to church with, people who are your neighbors. Unnecessarily separate you
from the bond that they have with me, but it is such a more enduring one where they have these real people in their lives. The human being needs people to whom they can open up about what they most care about in life, and the number of people who can't open up to friends is scary. I know this from my happiness hour. I know this.
Yeah, well, if you can't open up to friends, then opening up to a YouTube personality or radio talk show host in some ways is better than nothing, but it's better than nothing in the same sense that for some people, perhaps, using pornography is better than having zero sexual expression. But overall, it's a delusion and it's a lie and it's damaging, right? The more extreme form of this kind of guru parasocial relationship is the evangelical Christian in Kenya who encourage people to come join him and starve themselves to meet Jesus, or people who follow Jim Jones into the jungles of Central America and took poison, or people who follow Reverend Sun Young Moon. All right, that's a more extreme form of epistemic corruption. But what Dennis Prager has in common with other gurus is encouraging people to cut themselves off from competing sources of information and to instead, abide by those sources of information that, he blesses with his kosher certification, essentially wreaking, epistemic sabotage, making people less able to understand what is true, what is real in the world.
This is pre-woke that this was a problem, and post-woke, it is a crisis.
Coming into this conservative world, if you will, that's what I'm going to call it, has made me find so many kindred spirits. Again, just beyond the realm of the political.
And remember, her friends from prior to her becoming close to Dennis Prager, her friends from the old days, many of them think she's joined a cult, and she's just amazed. Why would they think that she's joined a cult? But she has taken on many of the characteristics of joining a cult. She doesn't believe in any outside institution, right? She believes in Dennis Prager and his, kosher certification for information. She has effectively joined a moderate level cult, which has many wonderful qualities, right? This is good for her career. I'm sure she's met, many wonderful people. There are many good things going on in her life, but she has joined, a low to moderate level cult.
Just kindred spirits in terms of disposition and worldview and life interest. And it's been really interesting for me because every place I've gone to, whether it's a speech of yours, whether it's your Torah minion, I know people listening will go, oh, of course you found this, with Dennis, because it's Dennis that's unifying all these people. But even, I mentioned my speech in Washington. I went to go speak in mid-April to a group in northern Washington state, 450 people, and they were all kindred spirits. I spoke recently to a Republican club in Santa Monica, all kindred spirits. Coming into this world, I have
Yeah, and if you join Reverend Sung Young Moon's organization, you'll meet all kindred spirits. If you join 3HO, Happy, Healthy, Holy, the sect that promotes Kundalini Yoga, you'll meet all kindred spirits. If you join some extreme Hasidic or Christian or secular organization, you'll be with all kindred spirits, and you'll distrust all competing sources of information. Not necessarily a good thing.
Found that. And as I said, it's been fascinating for me to contemplate, and this is in a typical Dennis and Julie way. Dennis and Julie, we go out on a lot of tangents, but we also kind of, I don't know if you notice this, every episode has this circular, like we come around to an earlier point. It's actually quite nice. I think it's because we all believe in something as opposed to just against something. You were saying earlier the left gets excited about destruction.
Okay, here's another excerpt from the show.
Did they do good for this country? One did immense good for this country. One is doing immense harm to this country.
So most right-wing pundits don't like to praise Donald Trump, all right? They have many reasons to feel highly uncomfortable about him. So instead, they focus their fire on the Democrats, and they say things like, we're living in a police state. So even if these latest 2 indictments of Donald Trump are wrong, that doesn't make us living in a police state, right? There's absolutely no equivalence between a misplaced, misjudged indictment of Donald Trump and living in a police state. Living in a police state means living in Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union or in North Korea today, right? If you live in the United States of America in 2023, you're not living in a police state.
From the day he came into office and rendered the ability of America to support itself with energy by knocking out.
Okay, this is Dennis Prager saying that, Joe Biden's, the most evil president ever.
Of the XL pipeline. To this day, the inflation that he has created and the
Joe Biden didn't create the inflation. Right, he played a role, maybe 10%, at most 20% of the inflation that we've suffered over the past 2 years is due to Joe Biden.
First, the use of the Department of Justice to render America a police state for the first time in its history.
Wow, right? To say that America today in 2023 is a police state, I mean, how absurd is that? And to the extent that anyone takes him seriously and gathers with kindred spirits who believe that the United States in 2023 is a police state, you've entered a cult, and it's bad for you, and it's bad for the people who are affected by you.
Amount of evil that this man has done. Look, we don't generally talk about politics.
The amount of evil that Joe Biden has done, I'm sure he's wrong about lots of things, but for the average person, for 99% of Americans, 99% of the time, life under Joe Biden versus life under Donald Trump, unless you deliberately choose to pay attention to the news, is indistinguishable. It doesn't really matter that much for 99% of Americans 99% of the time.
And but the evil that this man is doing to this country has no parallel in the history of the presidency of the United States.
Wow. Right? The evil that Joe Biden is doing to America has no parallel in the history of the United States. Right? That's how you get to be a right-wing pundit. Right? That's how you enrage and engage. When you enrage, right, and to the extent you take Dennis Prager seriously, you will be more enraged than if you didn't take him seriously, right? To the extent that you're a Dennis Prager fan, you will be disabled. You will be dysfunctional. You will be less capable. You will be less happy, less effective in the world. I mean, the idea that the United States is a police state because of these misjudged, if they are, indictments is absurd. I mean, instead of juicing up, needless hatred, Dennis could instead encourage, understanding. April 28, 2020, Dennis wrote, people argue that a temporary police state has been justified, talking about America under COVID restrictions because of the allegedly unique threat to life posed by the new coronavirus. Let us agree we are closer to a police state than ever in American history. So I was in Australia. Australia's response to COVID was about 10 to 20 times more severe than what the average American experienced. And Australia wasn't a police state. So the idea that the lockdowns in America made America a temporary police state is absurd. Okay. Let me get my bearings. Back to some good, solid reporting here from the New York Times.
Libel lawsuits have been on the rise, too, according to the latest data collected by the Media Law Resource Center. Many legal experts said such suits were often used to punish smaller news organizations for aggressive coverage and to deter others from...
Okay, so if there's a pushback against journalists who are hurting people, all right, and the journalists may be doing good things, they may be doing great things, heroic things, moral things, but in the course of doing that, they're going to hurt some people. How would you not expect that they're going to want to push back? And if there aren't legal means for people to push back against journalists who are hurting them, they will use extra legal things like breaking legs. So one thing that gurus and pundits do, the successful ones, is they make you feel amazing and they make you feel like you are the recipient of some amazing wisdom. And that's what you get here. This is Dennis Prager at Oxford University 2012 saying that Hamas is a greater obstacle to peace than Israel.
Brotherhood. Number two, on this issue, just appealing to your common sense. In modern history, every war has been between a free state and a police state, or two police states. I cannot think of a 20th century example of any other. And the same holds true here. You have the police state of Hamas. If you differ with Hamas, they kill you. Where in the world other than Israel does anyone ever argue that the free state doesn't want peace and the police state wants peace? There is no other example on earth. There is no other.
Okay, so United States, right, supposedly, well, definitely a much freer state than Iraq in 2003. It was the United States that invaded Iraq in 2003. The Free State invaded the police state, 2001. Free State United States invaded Afghanistan, the quasi-religious police state. The United States invaded Grenada, 1983. Free State invading quasi-police state. The United States has intervened militarily in many different ways all over Latin America, right? The Free State, right, invading the sometimes, what you could argue, verging on the police state. So all the time, free states are invading police states. So what Dennis Prager says here sounds amazing. You feel like you're getting something truly profound, but upon examination, it's absurd.
Other example on earth of a country targeted for extinction? None. 220 some odd countries in this world. Only Israel is targeted for extinction. And we have a debate on...
So the United States went to war with North Vietnam, right? Free state going up against a police state. The United States bombed Serbia in the 1990s. Wasn't that a free state going to war with a police state? So upon examination, many of these seemingly profound and just amazing insights in the way they make you feel inside, they just dissolve away. Right back to the New York Times.
From speaking out. And sometimes, as Ms. Chulgin and New Hampshire Public Radio have learned, the physical and legal threats converge. Their ordeal is a striking example of the perils facing news organizations in an era when politicians regularly demonize journalists and some judges want to curtail the First Amendment protections that the press has long enjoyed. Heightening the freedom of the press stakes, a state judge in New Hampshire last week ordered NHPR to let him review transcripts of its interviews with certain sources, including those who had agreed to speak on an anonymous basis. Legal experts called the ruling unusual and alarming, saying such decisions could make it harder for journalists to investigate potential wrongdoing by public figures.
Okay, so if you make doing investigative journalism harder, right? It's harder on journalists, and it's harder on those who would benefit from that investigative journalism. It's making life easier for other people whose lives are being ruined by investigative journalists. Now, I'm instinctively almost always on the side of investigative journalists, but it's not like there's only, one side with the angels here. It's absolutely impossible to think about any kind of decent society where it's not possible for, regular people to fight back against journalists. Why should journalists have the exclusive ability to hurt people?
Shortly before the houses in Massachusetts and New Hampshire were vandalized, Ms. Chulgin had published an investigation into alleged sexual misconduct by Eric Spofford, the founder of New Hampshire's largest network of addiction rehabilitation centers. Her house was attacked less than 2 days after New Hampshire Public Radio refused Mr. Spofford's demand to take down Ms. Chulgin's online article. Mr. Spofford has denied the allegations of sexual misconduct and has said he had nothing to do with the vandalism. The man in the blue raincoat, who is caught on video, is not him. Last year, he accused New Hampshire Public Radio, which has about 24 journalists, of trying to pin the attacks on him, quote, to try to deter me from bringing legal action because they know I will win. Mr. Spofford soon sued NHPR and Ms. Chulgin, among others, for libel. Ms. Chulgin and her colleagues do not know who is behind the vandalism, but they are convinced that it was connected to their investigation into Mr. Spofford. That's being a journalist in America today, Ms. Chulgin said in an interview. Mr. Spofford said in a statement that the New York Times was spreading the same, quote, false accusations that NHPR.
Okay, earlier I was playing an MP3 on how to connect by saying it with feeling. I think I found the relevant video here. Let's see if it's any good. That does a tremendous amount towards my feeling of comfort, developing my health, working out, getting decent sleep, getting plenty of exercise, eating right, stuff like that. And then noticing what makes me agitated and journaling about it and working it through. So the more comfortable I am, the less likely I am to fall prey to ridiculous addiction. So I used to try to soothe my anxiety by pursuing sex, by pursuing pornography, by attention seeking, by going to extremes in politics and religion. But if I could just calm down, then I tend to make better decisions. Luke recommends Alexander technique for the face. No, Alexander technique is a holistic technique. The Alexander technique is a way for noticing how you react to a stimulus and whether your reaction serves you. So many people react to a stimulus by their head, jutting forward, tipping back, compressing the neck. One shoulder tends to be, higher than the other. One hip is going to be rotated forward, wrenching the whole back. People carry all sorts of unnecessary tension around the eyes, around the lips, and around the forehead. Like, look at this beautiful forehead. Do you see my forehead crinkling right now? You see all sorts of unnecessary tension around my eyes. Do you see waves of tension just radiating from my lips? I'm a man who is at ease in the world. I'm at ease with me. I'm at ease with you. I'm at ease with this beautiful community that we're creating. And so that radiates from my face. Except for when I'm not, I'm racked by, anxiety and depression. Alexander techniques, disgusting but effective. Well, here's a basic Alexander. Let go of everything that you think you know. So notice I took that in. I let go of everything that I think I know. I've moved from a state of judgment. When I do live streams, I'm frequently in a state of judgment. And now I'm just in a state of awareness. I'm just observing what's going on around me, and I don't need to judge it. When I do that, my face relaxes, the neck and the back unlock, the breathing comes easier. Like I get more width and more length as I let go of that unnecessary tension. And so the Alexander technique is a way of noticing how you react to a stimuli and then learning how to let go of those responses that don't serve you. We tend to build up body armoring, particularly as we get older. Right? Body armoring are these unnecessary tension patterns. So if you can learn to notice what your unnecessary tension patterns are, then start to release them, you will feel more at ease in the world. Other people will have more comfort with you because you are more comfortable with yourself. You will be less compulsive, less driven. You will make better decisions. You will be calm. All right, so it's dangerous for an addicted personality to be struggling, right? If you have a tendency towards addiction, you want to minimize how much struggle you do. And when you do struggle, you want it to be in like an appropriate venue, such as you're struggling to lift a weight or you're struggling with a workout. Okay, I put a link there to a video from November 1, 2022, how to connect by saying it with feeling. New Yorker has an interesting article that's connected to what I was just talking about there. Daniel Bard, Major League pitcher, made an improbable comeback, then he had to do it again. The Colorado Rockies pitcher overcame a mysterious control problem to return to the major leagues, but the problems were not gone for good. So what the hell happened to this bloke?
On a drizzly morning in February, outside Greenville, South Carolina, Bard sat on the dingy turf floor of a baseball facility and did some stretching. It was early, and the batting cages were empty. He had just dropped his kids off at school. A few other local pros trickled in, and he joined them to gossip and to train. After some rapid pull-ups and other strength exercises, he and another player grabbed their gloves and went to spots on opposite ends of the facility for a game of long toss. Bard warmed up by pausing his leg at various heights in his throwing motion before connecting the movements and letting his body flow. Bard was never really taught how to pitch. For a long time, it seemed like he was born to it. His maternal grandfather was the baseball coach at MIT, and his father, Paul, made the minor leagues as a catcher. Growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina, Bard, the oldest of 3 boys, played catch in the backyard, learning by instinct and imitation. From the time he was 2 and 3 years old, he had excellent throwing mechanics, Paul told me. Bard's brother Jared played college ball. The youngest, Luke, also made it to the majors. Bard says his parents always told him that he could stop playing if he was no longer having fun. But he had a sense of calling, and his parents, who were religious, understood. When Bard got to high school, he made the team but sat on the bench. He was gangly, less muscular than some of the other boys. Paul told him that he'd be the best of all of them once his frame filled out, and Bard believed him, or at least kept working.
So here's the upshot in this story. When you think about what you're doing, you often perform it less well than if you are not thinking about what you're doing. So you will walk more gracefully, more easily, more efficiently and effectively with less stress and strain if you're not thinking about walking, right? You will get in and out of a chair if you're not thinking about getting up and getting down to your chair. Right? Movement in general, athletic performance in general is much more effective and efficient and graceful if you're not thinking about what you're doing. So if I'm thinking about this show and the great points I want to make, that has a time and a place. But if I let go of all my plans, if I let go of my preconceptions, if I let go of my judgments and how I want to impose my will on reality periodically and just take a break and move from a place of judgment to a place of just awareness, then my breathing frees up, my back unlocks. A lot of good things come from intermittently letting go of everything that I think I know.
Working as if he did. Daniel has always been very cerebral and very responsible. His mother, Kathy, told me he liked to please. He was a typical firstborn. After Bard's sophomore year, his grandfather helped get him into a New England showcase for scouts and college recruiters. Paul told him that he should try to throw 90 miles per hour, something he'd never done. He hit 91, faster than anyone else. His grandfather draped his arm around his shoulder and introduced him to the newly eager scouts and coaches. Like, "This is my grandson," Bard recalled. Everyone wanted to talk. I had never felt that before. It's a weird feeling, but it was a pretty good feeling when you're an insecure 15-year-old kid. He went to showcases down south and kept throwing hard. He transferred to a small private school to get more playing time. Pro scouts came to watch him, and he...
So everything's going great until he starts getting coaching, and then everything falls apart.
He got several college scholarship offers. He accepted one from the University of North Carolina and became an All-America starter. "I did the bare minimum to get by in school, which is the part I regret," he said. But it was a deliberate choice. He didn't want to have anything to fall back on. In his junior year, he led UNC to the finals of the College World Series. Afterward, he was drafted by the Red Sox in the first round. He reported to the Instructional League in Arizona, where prospects train with less pressure and scrutiny than they face in the minors. He threw 3 innings, and nearly every pitch went 100 miles per hour. "I was like, oh, if I can do that, I'm going to move," he recalled. "I'm not going to be in the minors very long." Bard showed up at his first spring training in 2007 with his confidence overflowing. He pitched well in 2 bullpen sessions. Then he was asked to throw a third. They had 7 pitching coaches watching this bullpen, which is 6 more than you'd usually have, he said. He'd barely warmed up when one coach suggested that he try a different grip for his fastball. Another said, "We think your leg kick is a little big. We just kind of want to calm that down." Bard had never thought about how many inches his leg rose or about the degree of his arm position. He'd always focused on the movement of the ball, not the movement of his body. He took the coach's advice eagerly, but it had a negative effect. His velocity dropped, his command disappeared. Thinking about his motion disrupted his muscle memory, and when he made mistakes, self-doubt crept in.
Right, so some people are improved by becoming more reflective and reflexive, monitoring what they're saying and doing, but other people just completely fall apart and they lose it.
He thought about the opportunity he was blowing, and about how much money he'd been given. Anxiety tenses the body. Attempting to control emotion can limit.
So one thing that accounts for the level of muscular tension, unnecessary muscular tension in your body is, how much you're resisting reality, how much you're treating the outside world as the enemy to be debunked, how punitive you are with regard to yourself and other people. All this stuff adds on to body armoring, which makes you more tense, less effective, right? Less effective in movement, less effective in thinking, less effective in relating to yourself, less effective in relating to other people.
The degrees of freedom in a joint. The tightness made Bard pitch worse, which aggravated his anxiety.
So when you tighten up, almost nothing good happens from that. And we tend to tighten up to get through difficult times, but then it becomes very, very difficult to let go of that unnecessary tension. So as we age, we have more and more layers of unnecessary tension and compression, distorting our musculature, distorting our thinking, distorting how we feel, distorting our perception of reality, distorting how we relate to ourselves and to other people. So the Alexander technique is a technique of subtraction, of noticing and letting go of all these harmful ways that we're distorting and compressing ourselves,
setting off a negative feedback loop. The Sox assigned him to their High A club, a typical spot for a new first-round pick, but he couldn't find the plate. He was demoted to Low A in Greenville and didn't fare much better. The beauty of baseball, people say, is in its daily repetitions. You get a lot of second chances, but when things aren't going well, the failures pile up.
Okay, so that's why it's really helpful to be able to notice the things that you're doing that are getting in your way, right? Whether in the way you're talking to yourself, relating to other people, unnecessary tension in your neck, in your lips, around your eyes, in your jaw, in your shoulders, in your hands, in your ankles, in your thighs, right? Unnecessary tension makes you less effective, less happy, less capable, less efficient, less gracious in life. So let me just fast forward a little bit in this story.
Global fix. He met with sports psychologists. He saw a hypnotist. He meditated. He whispered mantras, which he found counterproductive.
Okay, so none of those things are going to deconstruct your layers of unnecessary tension. What you need to learn to do is, where am I interfering with my best functioning? And then how can I notice what I'm doing, the unnecessary tightness, compression, the self-defeating habits I've developed, the wall of body armoring that I've developed, and how can I inhibit this unnecessary tensing and constricting and compressing myself, and then opening up to a more gracious, graceful, efficient and effective way of operating.
Every morning, Bard would get out of bed and head to the field for another day of disaster. After the summer, the Red Sox sent him to Hawaii for winter.
So if you're having day after day of disaster, right, you're probably not going to think your way out of the problem. You have to get a more objective perspective on yourself. That's why it helps to have a performance coach or an Alexander technique teacher, or you can use video or a triptych of mirrors to notice what are your habits of unnecessary tension and compression. Once you start noticing these habits of, say, tipping your head back, compressing your neck, you can inhibit that tendency to tense and compress your neck and instead have a gentle wish, like you may gently wish that Sunday is a sunny day, for your head to release forward and up, leading your spine, leading your whole torso into length and width.
Interball. He continued to pitch badly, but he was in Hawaii. He surfed and wore flip-flops to work. The pitching coach there, Mike Cather, saw the tightness in Bard's delivery and on his face, and Bard remembers him promising to send a positive report to the Sox no matter how he pitched. "I think I went out and I added 3 or 4 miles an hour instantly," Bard recalls. He didn't wonder why he'd snapped out of his funk. He just let it happen.
So if you have more tightness, right, that's going to interfere with your sales ability. It's going to interfere with your relationship with yourself. It's going to interfere with your relationships with other people. You're going to think less clearly. You are going to perceive less clearly. Life is going to become less enjoyable for you.
Struggled too with all the attention he was getting. He wasn't a celebrity, but it was Boston, and he was on the Red Sox. When you're there, it feels like you could go to a restaurant in India and get recognized, he said. In early September, the Sox were in first place and 9 games ahead of the Tampa Bay Rays for the final American League.
Yeah, and then everything started falling apart.
For a star closer, apparently filling the position that Bard had thought would be his. There was an opening in the starting rotation, and he took it. Reporters swarmed him in the clubhouse after bullpen sessions and batting practice. He'd have to...
Yeah, and his pitching fell apart.
He wasn't recalled to the majors until the end of August, and he didn't pitch well when he got there. He began the next season in Double-A, then was demoted to Single-A. His once smooth delivery had disintegrated. After one outing in September, the crowd booed him, and Adair, who had come to watch him, ran out of the stadium in tears.
That's his wife.
The next day, the Red Sox let him go. That was when Bard Googled the yips. He had known what was happening for a while.
Okay, the yips are when you have interfering tension patterns, when you have interfering compression patterns, when you have taken on these habits of unnecessary body armoring and compression. And they make you less effective, less efficient, less gracious, less kind to yourself, less kind to other people.
Everyone did. But everyone, including him, had avoided saying it out loud. Many baseball players have minor control issues at one point or another.
Was it all because the coach said, grip this? Well, we're all incredibly vulnerable, all right? His problem is not because a coach said, grip this. He was a sitting time bomb due to extraordinary levels of unnecessary tension, compression, anxiety, all right? But then there was the activating incident that unleashed these problems. So you might be going along, thinking, everything's great, but then you suffer one setback and your life just spirals downhill. And it's not the setback that's ruined your life. You're a sitting time bomb where just the smallest setback is just going to set you off. So we're all vulnerable. We all have different levels of vulnerability. But if we're denying reality, right, we're going to have a lot of tension and compression, right? If we, build up some bad habits, we're going to be, much more open to this sort of collapse, as opposed to if we have some ability to spot our interfering tension and compression patterns. We have some ability to notice or to take in feedback about, self-destructive things we're doing, about unnecessary ways that we're kind of pulling down and tightening and pulling in on ourselves, then it's going to be a lot easier to overcome things like the yips.
Sometimes it happens after an injury, when a player is relearning how to throw, over-attending to discrete motions that used to feel fluid and natural. Overthinking is the simple way to put it. The brain's prefrontal cortex trips up the sensory cortex and the motor cortex.
So just experiment when you get in and out of a chair. Just convince yourself, I'm not standing, or I'm not sitting, right? Or when you're walking, just convince yourself, I'm not walking, and you'll notice that all your movement becomes easier. Right? It's when we think about what we're doing, when we think about our movements, that we tend to tighten up and compress. It's like if I tell you, don't think about a pink elephant, you start thinking about a pink elephant.
In other cases, the mind can essentially go blank. Players usually snap out of it, the way Bard had years before. But the brain can get stuck in certain patterns. And
so when the brain gets stuck in certain patterns, right, the brain exists inside the body. Right? Habits that are going on in your body are going to affect how your brain functions. If you're tightening and compressing in your body, you're going to be tightening and compressing in your thinking. So what's going on in your body is going to affect your thinking and your emotions. What's going on in your emotions is going to affect your thinking and your body. Right? So our emotions take place within the body, Our thinking takes place within the body, and then the body in turn is affected by the thinking and the emotions. All right, we are a unity, and emotions, thinking, and muscular tension patterns are all constantly affecting each other.
And the yips can take over in a way that no one fully understands. Years ago, Roger Angell published a piece in this magazine about Steve Blass, a Pittsburgh Pirates ace who won 2 complete games in the 1971 World Series against the Baltimore Orioles, then lost his skill a year later. Baseball players sometimes call the yips Steve Blass disease. Anyone whose work involves the repetition of refined motor skills, surgeons and musicians, for example, can get the yips. The term was popularized by a golfer, Tommy Armour, who played on the PGA Tour in the 1920s and 30s. Some small percentage of the afflicted suffer from a neurological condition called focal dystonia, which is linked to abnormalities in the neural pathways of the brain and leads to involuntary muscle contractions. Other cases seem to have a psychological basis. When treating athletes with the yips, sports psychiatrists try both to alleviate their anxiety with breathing exercises, therapy.
So there's no psychology outside of the body. Our psychology takes place within our musculature. So whatever's going on with your body is going to have a profound effect on your psychology. If you are tight and tense in your body, right, your soul, your demeanor, your self-talk, your interactions with yourself and with other people will be extra tight and extra tense. If you're at ease and gracious and flowing and, feeling fantastic in your body, right, and your body's doing everything that you want it to be able to do, right, you get much, more likely to be at ease in your interactions with yourself and with other people. Our thinking similarly takes place within the body. If our body is tight and tense and locked down, our thinking is going to be tight and tense and locked down. Back to the New Yorker.
And the like, and to fool their brains into accessing deep working memory rather than the misfiring part of the brain. A golfer might try putting with the opposite hand, or distracting himself by counting backward from 3 before swinging. A tennis player struggling with her toss might do little math puzzles just before serving.
So these are all distracting from the main issue. The main issue is that you have developed self-defeating muscular tension patterns. And so you need a good Alexander Technique teacher who will notify you to your self-defeating unnecessary tension and compression patterns, help you notice them, and then help you inhibit them so that you don't do things that are self-destructive to you, opening up space for lengthening, for widening, for letting go of these unhelpful tension and compression patterns.
Cruz, a sports psychologist who has published several studies about the yips, told me that the goal often is not to eradicate the yips, but to outsmart them. This turns out to be very hard to do.
So what she's talking about here is, adding new layers on top of the old layers. So I prefer the Alexander technique of subtraction. Instead of adding new layers, new theories, new practices, new tips on top of the old habits, instead take a look at your old habits that are getting in your way, the old habits of tension and compression, unnecessary tightness and pulling down and in on yourself, and start to notice those, inhibit those, let them go, and have a gentle desire to take up your full space in the world. Have a gentle desire for your head and neck to be free, for your head to release, leading your whole torso into length. So I love the Alexander technique of subtraction, noticing the old, unhelpful, self-defeating tension and compression patterns, noticing them so that you can stop performing them, then creating space for growth and for width and for freedom.
In 2000, Rick Ankiel, a star rookie for the St. Louis Cardinals, lost his control on the mound during a playoff game. He spent a few years trying to regain his form before he reinvented himself as an outfielder. Clinically, I believe what happened is this. I don't know, he later wrote in a memoir, and neither does anyone else. While Bard was with the Red Sox, his teammate John Lester found that he couldn't throw the ball to first base anymore. Runners started taking big leads when he pitched. Eventually, he tried bouncing the ball to first. Lester has been reluctant to talk publicly about his difficulties. Steve Sachs.
So if you can't talk about your difficulties, it's really hard to overcome them, right? You know you've overcome a difficulty when you can talk about it without getting all sorts of weird tension and compression patterns in your voice or in your face or in your back.
A second baseman for the Dodgers in the 80s has said that when he began struggling to throw, he became the laughingstock of the league. In the sports world, there's still a degree of stigma about mental health issues, partly owing to a narrow definition of toughness.
Okay, good article in the New Yorker. And there's a great video on the Patreon of Decoding the Gurus. This is Mick West talking about UFOs and conspiracy psychology with Australian psychologist Matthew Brown and Irish cognitive anthropologist Chris Kavanagh.
A bit of that. What's going on there? There's a variety of people in the UFO community, and some of them are much more ready to believe than others. You should, if you want to experience it, just kind of join a few UFO groups, and you'll see there's a variety of different types. Some of them are a bit more nuts and bolts into looking into UFOs, but very, very rapidly when you start looking into UFO culture, you get towards essentially what's supernatural. People who believe in, a supernatural explanation of things are very credulous about accepting a video at face value. And someone posts a video of something that looks like a face reflecting in the window, and it's obviously just some blobs of light or something. You'll get a whole bunch of people saying, "Yeah, I can see what you're saying," and the people say, "Yeah, I can kind of feel vibrations coming off this picture." And with UFOs, like someone posts a fake video, and people, why wouldn't it be real? They accept it. They think that there are beings coming from other dimensions, and that they're projecting realities, and all kinds of things are going on. So there's always a range of people who are going to view any particular video, and some of them are going to view it a certain way.
The obvious alien autopsy in the room is the recent testimony by David Grush, the former intelligence officer or some position in the government, who has claimed, to much fanfare, this is, so speaking Mick, about, that people, whether or not they're critical or not, I'm consistently amazed by the coverage of this particular story. So in any case, he's alleged that, I don't believe he's seen the video, he's just heard that the evidence exists, but people have presented it as very significant that he's been willing to go on the record acknowledging this. And there's articles in The Guardian. It's been discussed by pretty much everyone that I can see online in the guru sphere. And I'm just curious, I think I know, but in any case, your response to this story and how it's being presented currently?
Well, the claims are pretty amazing, and if they are true, they would change the world in an earth-shattering way forever. It would be the biggest story in human history. But you'll notice that if you go and look at all the front pages of the media, there's not really any coverage of it, and I think everybody's being pretty cautious about it. There's a few media outlets that are doing stories on it, but it's not like leading stories. And the reason is that he doesn't really have any evidence. This is one guy saying that other people have told him that there is an alien spaceship crash retrieval program. And he's telling a whole bunch of stories that people have told him that he believes to be true, but he doesn't actually know if they're true. He believes them to be true because people have told him. And I think he's seen some documents, but he hasn't even seen any.
Right. So first-hand claims don't mean anything to me about UFOs or voter fraud or anything. What I want to see are people with expertise who are making admissions that go against their self-interest, right? If I get credible people with expertise making admissions that go against their self-interest, right, I take that seriously. So when I refuse to go along with the right, dissident right herd instinct of saying that the coronavirus, was no big deal and this is just, left-wing big government overreach, right? I did that against my own self-interest. My audience obviously wanted to hear about government overreach. And when I said that there's no credible evidence that the voter fraud determined the 2020 American presidential election, that was an admission I made against my own self-interest. So if you got someone who, is smart and they know something and they are making admissions against their own self-interest, right, those are the type of people that I take seriously, as opposed to, these absurd, firsthand stories about UFOs.
Photos. He didn't work in the program, didn't work in the crash retrieval program. And he's not seen any of the spaceships or anything like that. And the story broke on this media site called The Debrief. And originally, they wanted the New York Times to do it. One of the reporters there, Ralph Blumenthal, was an old New York Times reporter, and the other one, Leslie Keane, worked with Ralph Blumenthal, and they did this original story back in 2017 about Lou Elizondo and the whole UFO thing back then. That's when the videos came out.
And this is, a great revelation about, how inept a lot of experts are, a lot of bureaucracies, a lot of militaries, a lot of, premier news organizations.
So they actually started the ball rolling. They tried to kind of repeat that. They tried to get the New York Times to do a story on this, which would have been huge. New York Times essentially turned them down because of various demands that they wanted about it. I can't remember exactly what the deal was, but the New York Times said no. They went to...
So anytime that Steve Saylor, for example, differs with the mainstream media, in my experience, Steve Saylor is right, at least 100 times for every time he's wrong compared to the Washington Post or the New York Times. And when it comes to UFOs, Mick West has a similarly impressive track record, to the best of my knowledge.
To, I think, Politico. Then they went to Washington Post. Washington Post needed more time to fact check it. So they didn't have the time for some reason. So they went to this other outlet called The Debrief, which is just kind of like a military, small media outlet, military themed with the UFO thing, UFO overtones. And they just, pushed out this article. And initially, this article, they just say, we have this crash retrieval program, we have documents, people have told me this, blah blah blah. Then we get a video of a bits of interview of this guy Dave Grush, done by this Australian journalist Ross Coulthard, and he starts saying things that are even more amazing. He says that not only do we have crashed alien spaceships, some of the crashed alien spaceships have bodies in them, which I thought really should have been the lead. Really should have been the lead thing. We have crashed alien, we have actually alien bodies. But turns out he never talked to Leslie Kean about that. He never talked to the two journalists about that for some reason, and she was like, I don't want to talk about bodies. And if he had told me about bodies, I wouldn't have put them in the story because bodies is too much. So it's almost like that she doesn't believe him on the bodies thing, but she does believe him on the spaceship thing. But she wants to do a spaceship story because she knows that's all true. But the bodies thing is a bit sketchy. And then he does like another interview for like a French newspaper, I think La Parisienne, something like that. And in that, he makes a claim that the US acquired a UFO in 1944, nearly 80 years ago, from Italy. And this UFO landed in Italy in 1933 and was captured by Mussolini's guys and held in a warehouse somewhere for 9 years until towards the end of World War II when the Allies invaded Italy, and they took this UFO back to the States and they started analyzing it, and then they discovered Velcro and Teflon and stuff like that and semiconductors by analyzing this UFO, which is just basically part of UFO mythology. Yeah, it's this old story that's been knocking around for a long time, and a lot of people think that's just a fake story. So it almost seems like it's not like he's discovered all these secrets. It's like somebody who believes in all the UFO stuff has been talking to someone else, telling them stuff, and then they talk to Dave Grush, and Dave Grush is, oh my god, we got this thing back in 1944. And it's just all of it is essentially UFO mythology. I remember someone tweeted today, and they said there's nothing in what Dave Grush has said today that we didn't already know. It's just that he's a trained professional who's coming forward for the first time. He's told us that he was asked, what evidence do you have that these are alien craft? So they've got these alien craft with dead aliens inside them. And so he says, what evidence do you have that these are alien craft? He doesn't say like, oh, well, they had aliens inside them. He says like, we did some analysis of the isotope ratio of some metal, and it was an unusual isotope ratio that must have been engineered.
They just ignored the alien body.
Aliens sat right there. They're like, what is this weird bit of tinfoil? So it's not the most compelling sounding story to me. It sounds pretty ridiculous, and apparently he has receipts. Apparently other people are going to come forward and corroborate what he's saying, but it just sounds like he's repeating UFO mythology. The isotope ratio thing is like at least 10 years old. I think people have been finding bits of metal and being like, oh, this isn't the right isotope ratio. And then there's another piece of metal, it's this little triangular piece of metal. It's made of multiple layers of magnesium and bismuth and a bit of zinc. And people are saying like, no human technology can create this. It's a metamaterial. It's a terahertz waveguide. But this is something that I believe it was sent in to Art Bell, who was this conspiracy theorist radio host like 20 years ago, with his cover letter of this guy saying, my grandfather had these things from his time in the military when he was like a telepathic communicator with the aliens. And I found this in an envelope in the attic, and I'm sending them to you to take care of. And they've been knocking around the UFO community ever since. But it's just a little bit of scrap metal, essentially. Like it's got these weird layers that probably come from some industrial process, like it was some sputtering or something like that, where you coat things and then a bit of the side of the container got coated with something. But these, again, it's just all UFO mythology being repeated in this weird framework of playing telephone, where everyone tells everybody something else. It's all top secret, and you don't know that it was originally just this silly story, and now it's gone through to Dave Grush, and now he's telling it to Congress.
We had a slight experience of this through the content that we analyze, looking at the kind of secular guru space, because in particular, there were a couple of other people that mentioned it as well, but the two most prominent were Sam Harris and Eric Weinstein. Indicated that they'd been contacted, I believe, independently by someone, and the person had got their telephone number. This was part of the thing that they found very convincing, and that person promised that they were going to reveal evidence to them about and this was around the same time as that information was starting to appear in the New York Times and the stories that you just talked about. And Sam Harris talked about it on his podcast. that, and he seemed quite, he acknowledged that I'm not all in on this. I'm just saying that there's credible people.
Just saying, credible people saying we got UFOs and alien bodies.